Hello, my name is Fernando Quanas. I'm doing a presentation on Wallace Stevens for American Literature 2. And I do apologize for there no being a webcam. I couldn't figure it out to pop it up on here. But either way, here's start my presentation, and we'll just get right through it. This is just some general background knowledge about Wallace Stevens. As you can see, he was born in 1879 in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is kind of ironic reading. Either way, his family was part of the Dutch church, which allowed Stevens to be enrolled in parochial schools, which is just a religious school that he would be attending. But during his time there, he was influenced to read by his father because he owned a large collection of books in the library. And by age 12, Stevens was already enrolled in public school where he studied Greek and Latin. And growing up, when Stephen was in high school, he was a really excellent student. He made all the good grades, he passed all the requirements, and etc. And then Stephen started showing early signs as a writer as he was writing for the school newspaper, which which many would seem that was sparked the interest as being a writer. But when he finished his studies in reading, he decided to continue his studies into Harvard University. And at Harvard, Stephen was encouraged by his father to devote himself to literacy aspects of Harvard life, meaning all he took was writer classes, reading classes, anything to better him in his literary aspects. Continuing on, for early work while in Harvard. During his time in Harvard, he was able to write for the Harvard Advocate, which is basically just a collection of arts and literary magazines that the college at Harvard had. It's actually one of the oldest continuous published college art too, as well, in the United States. But by the third year, he made one of his probably most famous work, a modern poetry, which we'll get into that later. He wrote this while in Harvard, which landed him working for the editor at Harvard Advocate. And over here you can see the picture of the modern poetry. But unfortunately, his time in Harvard ended in 1900 when there was a shortage of money from the family, so he had to withdraw from Harvard University. When now we get into post Harvard. Once he left Harvard, leaving, he was not working towards any degree no more, as he had no funds. So instead, he decided to work as a journalist. So as you can see, he still continued on with his written capabilities. And well, he decided to work as a journalist and began reporting for the New York Evening Post. And he felt that the work was boring and dull and didn't really have a lot of sentimental value to him as well. But he wanted to do whatever to feel part of New York. So that's the only thing that was keeping him going for writing in the New York Evening Post. But in the evenings, he really enjoys musical productions, theatrical productions as well. And during his free time, he would be writing poems or even drafting a play. In his work life, after he retired for the paper, as mentioned earlier before, that it was really boring and dull to him, he wanted to devote his time only to literature. Although his father at the time, who was still alive, told him to stop writing and at least pursue something that would benefit him, in which his father told him to study law. So Stevens went to the New York School of Law from 1901 to 1904, when then he worked briefly in the law partnership with former Harvard classmate. After this, Stephen would eventually leave his partnership with his Harvard classmate to work for various law firms in New York City. In 1908, he accepted a post with the American Bonding Company, which was an insurance firm. But although he only stayed to the company when it was purchased out again by the Fidelity and Deposit Company, which then leads us to further on his work life and adult life. As Stephen's career in law was making him financially secure, he would then later on marry his wife, Elise Viola Koch, hopefully I pronounced that right, in September 1909. But tragedy did struck a few years later as Stephen's father died in 1901, and then in 1912 his mother had also died. Hold up, 1901. Sorry about that. It's supposed to be 1911. And then a year later, His mom died in 1912. Sorry about that. But continuing though, during the period, Stevens wrote no poetry during this time, even though it was indeed a pretty tragic moment for him. He still didn't have no uh, verge to write. But this also, but nonetheless, he was still involved in the New York City's community of art, and through his association with several writers such as Moraine Moreau and William Carlos Williams. And through this, Stephen developed a fondness for modern painting, and especially more of an Asian aspect of it. He loved Asian art as it had, like, for the wide colors and precision and every little detail that he had. And he would later implement, some of the Asian aspects of art into his own art, his own work. Writing career. In 1915, he produced another important poem, Sunday Morning, which we'll also get into that later. And during the next few years, Stephen began organizing his poems into publication for a single volume of all his collection of poems. And together with the early Sunday Morning and Le Monaco de Mon Oncle, I hope I pronounced that right as well, it showed that it proved success with Stephen's volume when it was published in 1923. His writing style is really precise, and many seem to be really hard for many to interpret and look at, as it is primarily concerned with how the imagination can transform just ordinary poets, which he believed that poets should use their powerful words to in order to change people's ways of believing and so. But he also wanted to write about how the world itself is chaotic, as many poets at the time were only writing about love, peace, and imaginable, happy thoughts. Whereas he was opposite. He wrote true to what his beliefs were, like as in the world, and he just like capturing that sense of how the actual world is and put that aspect into his work on words. Now, this is my take on this Sunday Morning. Um, from what I saw from the Sunday Morning summary, is that Stevens discusses the interaction between nature and humanity. Because through mankind, nature symbolizes both the paradise and the death. And Stephen also does bring up images of nature associated with religion, but in all sense, nature's independence and disregard for human affairs. From that's what I've got from the Sunday Morning reading that I have done. And which brings us now to the other poem of modern poetry. In this poem, Stephen writes the rules, or how he says theories of how the modern poetry should actually be, based on how, as we said before, his writing style was true to the world. And according to him, it has to be something new, something with like real settings and people and events, not something really as so make believe, or fantasy. And he says that modern poetry should focus on the acts of the mind itself, and hopefully it expects his words or his beliefs to help people find satisfaction into their own lives if they're ever feeling down or, out of place. As you can see, even from the picture expectation, that's how he saw poets nowadays were writing. Where in reality, yes, you can see in reality is actually not as fun and easy as other some easy poets are. And I'll just provide a quote that I think was actually really meaningful. Reality is not what it is. It consists of many realities which it can be made into. This is from Wallace Stevens, born in 1879, died in 1955. And I hope you enjoyed the small presentation. I didn't want to give such a big and boring, presentation for you guys. So I concluded and summarized the previous keynote into a more condensed version. So hopefully this was